This episode is sponsored by Audible. Get a free audiobook of your choice that you get to keep with their free trial. You can learn more at lutherancartographer.com/audible. The Lutheran Cartographer, episode 66. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different places. I'm your host, Nicholas Weber. Today we're going to Brownwood, Texas to talk to Pastor Richard Mittelstadt. He is the pastor of Grace Lutheran Church there in Brownwood. Pastor Mittelstadt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Help orient us geographically. Where are we?
That's a good question because it's kind of almost a misnomer. Texas is a big state, as everyone likes to brag, and I know a pastor up in Alaska that likes to remind everybody that, if you cut Alaska in half, Texas will still only be the third largest state. But where Brownwood, Texas is, they call it West Texas. We're kind of on the edge of what they call the hill country. There is hillier areas to Texas. And we're right kind of on the fringe of, like I say, what they call West Texas. From here, it continues further west, and you get up into the Panhandle, and you get out to the Permian Basin and things like that, where they're doing all the drilling for the oil and things of that sort. And so we're kind of right on the eastern edge of West Texas. I don't know if you want to call it unique, but one of the interesting things about Brownwood is if you head about 2 hours in any direction, you're going to run into a larger, more metropolitan area. If you continue west, you're going to hit Abilene. If you continue almost straight east, you're going to hit Fort Worth. If you continue kind of southeast, you hit Austin. So we're remote, but we're within 2 hours or less of a major metropolitan area.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself. What's your background and how did you come there?
Well, I'm second career, as a pastor. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and went to school at Northern Illinois in DeKalb. That's where I met my wife, and we lived pretty much in the Chicago suburb area and Northwest Indiana. We did a short stint down in Central Illinois, but for the most part, a suburb of Chicago, Northwest Indiana. That's all kind of a big conglomerate now. It all kind of runs together, and that's pretty much where I had lived my life until went off to seminary and was placed down in a place called Eden, Texas, which is also in West Texas. And at placement service, when they said Eden, Texas, I had no idea where Texas even was, not alone where Eden, Texas was. And so it was rather interesting. We flew down and went to visit Eden, and Eden is a town of, I think it's about 1,200, no, it's about 1,900, but 1,000 of those live in a prison. So it's a very small town. It was a dual parish with another congregation about 30 miles down the road in Menard, Texas. From there, I had received a call to Seguin, which is right outside of San Antonio, which is kind of central South Texas. San Antonio is obviously one of the major metropolitan areas of Texas. It's one of the largest cities even in the country, although it does not appear to be. When you go through San Antonio, it doesn't appear to be as big as what it is. And then right about 2 years ago, I received a call to Brownwood, which is back into West Texas. Oddly enough, it's even in the same circuit where I began. So,
fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about this East Texas, West Texas divide. You've mentioned that it's hillier, but the way you've referred to it in your journeys is that there seems to be almost some maybe some cultural differences there as well. Is that the case, or am I reading too much into what you're saying?
Oh, no, there's definitely, I mean, Texas really, until I got here, I never realized what Texas is like. And culturally, geographically, I mean, it's really kind of interesting. And in West Texas, it tends to be a little bit drier. The further west you go, it even goes up in elevation. West Texas tends to be a little bit slower pace. It's a lot more ranchers. It's not uncommon my wife and I go for walks around our neighborhood, and when people drive past you, you wave at each other. Neighbors will say hello, even if you don't know them, as you're walking by. As you're driving down the road, people will wave at you as you're driving past them. People will still open doors for women occasionally. It's, you hear yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. And there still is kind of that old, respect, amongst people. As you go further east, if you would, you kind of hit the I-35 corridor, which is kind of you have Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and then San Antonio. And that's one of the major industry. And so it's certainly a little bit more built up. The people are a little bit more rushed, a little bit different atmosphere. As you continue further east, what's interesting is you get into eastern Texas, northeast Texas, you would think you're in Minnesota. I mean, you've got these huge, tall pine trees. It's actually called the Piney Woods. They do logging there. I never knew there was logging done in Texas, but there's huge sawmills. I mean, like I say, you'd think you were in Minnesota. And then you go south from there and you get into the Gulf. And so you get down into the beaches, you get down into what they call the valley. And so you've got the Gulf, you got the beaches, you've got the humidity, you've got Houston. But it's a totally different area there. There again in West Texas, I forgot to mention that when you get out towards the Panhandle, you actually have Palo Duro, which is the second largest canyon in the United States. It's only smaller than the Grand Canyon. And so you've got a very just wide array of geography. If you want to go to drier, you can head further west. If you want humid, you can go east. If you want metropolitan, you kind of go in the middle. Although it's funny talking geography that around this area, I'm in Brownwood. There's a town south of us called Brady, and then Eden, where I was, and they all kind of argue over who's the central part of the state of Texas. And so it's a debate as to who's in the middle, and everybody claims to have the marker, for where the actual center of Texas is.
The true center. I want to go back to your personal story. What are some of the contrasts that you draw between where you were in Illinois with your time with Texas now?
Well, certainly, I mean, I would say there's a little bit different, I don't want to say work ethic, but more of almost a cultural difference in that, the Midwest, people are a lot more rushed. People are in a hurry. I used to be in sales and stuff, and it's funny that, with the advent of cell phones and pagers and stuff, the way people expected responses was quicker and quicker and quicker. And down here, people are a little bit more laid back. There's still pride, with people, especially when you get out into West Texas with the ranchers and stuff. There's a lot more pride.
So it seemed like when you're, at least in your part of the Midwest, there wasn't a lot of pride of place, but now there is where you are in Brownwood?
Well, when I say pride, I guess I mean, what's the word I want? Yeah, pride isn't really, maybe pride wasn't there, maybe traditional, values, maybe is more what I'm looking for,
Okay.
In West Texas, there's still a lot more of a traditional value to the way people, the way people live. It's becoming, you were commenting about where you are, and, There certainly is a little bit more progressivism coming in, but there's a lot more traditional values, I guess was more the word I was looking for. Up in the Chicago area, things are certainly a little bit more progressive and things of that sort. Down here in West Texas, I mean, it's getting better, but things like fast food, there is no such thing as fast food. If you go to a fast food restaurant, it will still take a little bit longer than, what you expected up north, and people are just more laid back about being willing to wait for things and stand in line and expect it. And I think some of that's tied to the fact that, like I said, people tend to drive an hour or two. I mean, people think nothing of driving an hour to go to a restaurant to eat. Whereas, in the Midwest, in the Chicago area, you went 2 blocks to get to where you were going, and that maybe took you almost the same amount of time, but it was only a couple of blocks away.
I have heard stories about Chicago traffic. Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Brownwood. What would you say are some of the best things about the area?
Brownwood is kind of a unique little town. I mean, it started out, I believe, originally it was an oil boom town. And then the oil boom kind of died out. And then the war came along, and Texas had World War II, I should say. And Texas had the second, or the largest at the time. It was Camp Bowie. And at the time during World War II, Texas had the largest military training base in all of Texas. Everyone thinks of Fort Hood and stuff. At the time, actually, Brownwood had the largest base. And then due to politics, it was greatly downsized. It's now just a National Guard facility, so it's nowhere near the size of what it was. And so Brownwood has kind of gone through ebbs and flows where it boomed under oil and then kind of died, and then it boomed during World War II, and then has kind of died back down. And even though our population has kind of remained somewhat constant, we're at about 19,000 people, and there's about 38,000 in the whole county. We're starting to see, I think, another coming back of the community. There's some in the downtown area, there's some businesses opening back up. I mean, the downtown was rather empty and rather bleak looking for many years, but there's some renovation going on. There's businesses going in. We've had a bookstore go in. We've had some restaurants go in. We've had some different alcohol, a tap house go in, a brew house go in. There's a winery going to go in. So there's some reinvestment going back in. The city is in the process of building what do they call it? A multi-purpose event center complex.
Fancy.
I wanted to make sure I got all those words in right. But they're investing, I think it's $8-9 million into building this. But the neat thing they're going to do is they're going to use some of the existing warehouse buildings from the community, and they're going to renovate those and make use of those rather than tear them down. And so they're going to keep some of the old architecture, and that's what some of these other businesses have done. They're keeping the old architecture. A couple of years ago, I'm not sure how many years ago for sure, but several years ago, the Lyric Theater opened in downtown. It used to be a movie theater, and they took and renovated it. Excuse me. They took and renovated it, and now they do live plays and stuff there with local talent. Also in the hub of Brownwood is Howard Payne University. So we have a 4-year university that's been here since the 1800s. It was established in 1889. So it's been a long-standing facility here in town. We also have a 2-year vocational school. It continues to kind of, like I say, grow back. there was a period of almost probably 30 years where nothing really happened in Brownwood, and you see it when you look at homes. There's this gap of like our home that we just bought, 2 years ago was built in the 70s, and you really don't see anything until the last 5 years of new construction. There was this void of home. Brownwood was kind of stuck in a time capsule. And so now it's kind of coming back. We have a Chick-fil-A now, so.
So then it sounds like one of the strengths of the community is just the fact that it's feeling vital again and growing again?
Yes, very much so. There's a good feeling within the community, I think, where people are feeling positive about things. And so there's reinvestment coming back in.
That makes sense. So if somebody was thinking about moving to Brownwood, what would be some of like the top highlights for you? Like, you got to move here for this reason. Would it be that those traditional values that we just talked about a few minutes ago, the revitalization? What would you say are like some of the maybe top 2 or 3 reasons that Brownwood's a great place?
I think the traditional values is very important, is a great point. As you mentioned, the revitalization. I think if you are, in particular, if you're not familiar, if you're a football fan, football is in particular, high school football is big in Texas. The whole Friday Night Lights thing. So if you have kids that are going to be high school age, Brownwood is typically a very competitive football team at the high school level. There again, to me, I mean, I played football in high school and things like that. It's just a whole different level down here. I mean, they actually have season ticket holders for high school football games, and so very much the community is very much built around, supporting the schools, and then the kids in the schools, and Brownwood kind of marries up to a town called Early, Texas, which is kind of a town of about 3,000, and the two kind of just merged together. We're out here in the middle of nowhere, and there's two towns that are merged together, and so there's some rivalries that go on between the two communities, and Early's in the process of they're going to build a new downtown, and so I think that's partially why Brownwood has to build this multi-purpose event center complex, and because you got to keep up, and so there's that competitive spirit even between the communities, and so I think if I'll go back to if you're looking for kind of the traditional values, and you want to get away from the rush of I've got to be here, I've got to be there, and I've got to get there, but there's 20 miles of traffic in front of me. I mean, I could drive from one end of Brownwood to the other in traffic in 10 minutes. When I first got here, my secretary one day, it was getting close to 5, and she said, "Oh, Pastor, you might want to be leaving, beat the rush hour traffic." And it's like, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Oh, yeah. It sounds like it's one of those towns where if there's a couple cars on the road, that's traffic.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Let's talk about the flip side. What are some of the challenges of being in Brownwood?
So probably some of the challenges, economically, it's very much a blue-collar community. We've got some major employers. Kohler has a big plant here. 3M has a big plant here. But as goes with any blue-collar community, as productions and things like that go up and down, so does the community to an extent. And so, although right now I think 3M is hiring, but there tends to be, I think, a little bit different culture to a blue-collar community. Although our hospital was owned by the city, and our hospital just got bought out by a larger hospital. And so that has now brought, I think, some more money into our medical community. We're getting more doctors coming in now, which is also a good thing. So we're seeing the medical community advance. So if you're in the medical fields and looking for a place, there's opportunities here as that's growing. There is even a 2-year nursing program here for people that, are surprisingly for a small community. There's a fair amount of higher education available. Like I say, we have the 4-year university, we have an off-camp or a satellite campus of a 2-year university, and we have a full vocational school in the community. And then there's the variety of restaurants. I'm amazed at, for the size town, how many different restaurants we have. Although it's different. When I was down in Seguin, if a restaurant opened up, chances are it was going to be a Mexican restaurant or a Mexican restaurant. If you wanted Mexican food, Seguin is a wonderful place to get Mexican food. If you wanted something else, it was very limited. And oddly enough, here in Brownwood, our Mexican restaurants are very limited. And if you want a good hamburger, there is a plethora of places to find a good hamburger.
All right. So I think at some point I missed where we transitioned from, what are some of the things that maybe you should be aware of in terms of the negatives?
Right. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Tell us a little bit more about maybe what are some of the challenges. Like if somebody, again, was thinking of moving there, you might say, you need to be aware of this.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Some of the challenges. So like I say, it tends to be a little bit more blue collar. We are, like I say, on the flip side, where it's nice that we are somewhat isolated. Also, we are somewhat isolated. We have a Walmart, we have a couple of grocery stores, but for instance, if you wanted to buy a men's suit, you're not going to find a men's suit in Brownwood, Texas. I don't know how many men's suits you find in Texas, but you're not going to find one.
I understand your point, though. Like, you're not going to find the same amenities that you would if you lived in downtown Dallas or something like that. Correct.
We don't have even like a dedicated shoe store anymore. There's just, so some of the frills of living in a bigger area, you just don't have here. Like I say, up until the change in the hospital, the medical was a little bit weaker, but that's making some changes. And also probably, I would say, if you are looking for, we tend to be a little bit also drier of a community, of an area. And so if you want
drier as
lush,
in alcohol consumption or dry?
No,
drier as in
rain.
Yes. Okay.
So if you're looking for, springs filled with, all sorts of greenery and flowers and trees, we do have it, but it's not like, I'll just say it's not like the Midwest, and during the summer I think there's a reason why it's called Brown County, because during the summer it will get pretty brown.
Gotcha.
And then, and even in the fall, you don't get the colors. That was one of the things living up north. You have the color change in the fall, and you really don't get that here.
Let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. Folks, if you like podcasts, you will enjoy Audible. It's a service that gives you an audiobook to listen to each month of your choice from a large library. And they want to get you started with a free trial offer that includes an audiobook that you get to keep. So go to lutherancartographer.com/audible to get your free audiobook and start your free trial today. If you're not sure what book to check out, I recommend taking a look at Pastor Jonathan Fisk's Broken: 7 Christian Rules That Every Christian Should Break as Often as Possible. This was recently released on Audible. I'm very excited about it. In the book, Pastor Fisk goes through the classic pitfalls of moralism, mysticism, and rationalism, as well as several others. Check it out at lutherancartographer.com/audible. Let's get back to our guest. One of the interesting things that we learned from when we talked to Pastor Scott Murray, who's over in Houston, that took him, he felt like after about 15 or 20 years, he feels truly welcomed as a Texan. What is it like there in terms of kind of the adoption into Texas and being a Texan and into the local community, would you say?
Yeah, so it's rather unique. So Texas is kind of interesting. You know, my son comments that, you know, Texans are the only ones that buy their own souvenirs. And so it's a unique culture. And so I think I would agree with Dr. Murray that it takes a little while. It, in Brownwood for us, has been probably a little bit different because I was here not even a year and then COVID hit. And so, I mean, everybody everywhere has kind of been, you know, thrown into, you know, a little bit different culture than what the world has been prior to that. And so I think it has certainly affected, you know, the way people have been, you know, carrying on in Brownwood and embracing people because, you know, everybody's been very distant, you know, because of all the mandates to, you know, we've been mandated to be distant. And so already people are starting together, the rank, there is some, you know, excitement in getting people back together again. But yes, unless you're born in Texas, you're never necessarily considered a Texan. You'll always be considered a transplant.
Well, let's go on and talk about what it's like to be Lutheran there. Is Texas part of the Bible Belt? Is there a lot of American Christianity around? What's it like to be a Lutheran there?
Yeah, being a Lutheran in Texas is rather unique. There's a lot of people that don't even know what Lutheranism is. I mean, the big churches in Texas are, you know, the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, and Church of Christ. So the university here in town is associated with the Baptist Church. And so here in Brown County and Brownwood proper, I mean, we are the only LCMS church that is here in Brownwood and Brown County, and we are the only Lutheran church that is in Brown County. The next closest Lutheran church is, probably 20 miles away, and it's an ELCA congregation. The next closest LCMS church is probably 35 miles away. So, I mean, especially when you get out here into West Texas, Lutheranism is rather spread out, you know, and there's not a lot of, in particular, a lot of Missouri Synod Lutheran congregations. You will find, like I said, you'll find in almost every town, you'll find a Baptist church. Most of them you'll find a Methodist church. And we are very much if you would, the outsider. You know, growing up in the Midwest, I mean, there were Lutheran churches on every corner, whereas down here there's not that presence of the Lutheran church. So we're very much looked at a little bit different. A lot of people don't know who we are. And so it's a learning curve for them to grasp what Lutheranism is.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's go on and talk about what it's like to raise a family there.
I think overall, I mean, I don't have a younger family And so, I mean, I can only base it upon, what I see of the members and in the community. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, the community is very, very oriented around the schools. They very much support their schools. We have several members that have been teachers who are now retired, but certainly I think the family is still a core unit and seen as important.
Mm-hmm.
It and I think that somewhat fits in with the traditional values, that are here, that people, that the nuclear family is still, you've got parts of the country where they're trying to tear the nuclear family apart, and I don't think that is as common here. I think, there's very much a support of the family here, and that's why, we have a fair amount of parks for the size town. We have a lot of parks in the community. We've got several of the parks have splash pads. We have an outdoor pool that has been put in with water slides and a lazy river, things of that sort. And so our sports complexes are big. They host tournaments, softball tournaments and things of that sort. And so people travel here to come for tournaments, and so there's a strong support of the family in that respect. And also, I guess, and I didn't mention earlier, also part of, I guess, an aspect of family and for the community is we also have a very large lake. I mean, we have a 7,300 acre lake that is on the edge of town, if you would. It's called Lake Brownwood. And so that also is, promotes the family, for boating, fishing, water skiing, all those kind of activities are very much a part of the culture here. Fishing is big, hunting is big. So you have a lot of families that, fish together, hunt together, and things of that sort.
That's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit more about those great things to do in the other area, whether it's hunting, fishing, places to eat, things to do. If you had somebody coming to town, what would you say? Oh, you got to check this out.
Well, the lake would be one. Like I say, it's a nice sized lake. It was created by damming up the Colorado River, and so it's a man-made lake, as are most of the lakes within Texas. We've got, bordering the lake, there's a 500 plus acre state park, which is just beautiful. A lot of it was built by the CCA. And so you've got paths that have concrete benches that have been built in, and there's lodge houses, there's camping, there's trails, there's all sorts of stuff out there. If you're into horseback riding and the whole rodeo thing and things like that, all these communities around here all have arenas and riding. We have a young lady who just moved down here from Wyoming. She's actually putting in a campground for people with horses, here in town. And so horseback riding and things of that is growing. Like I say, there's almost all these towns have riding arenas. So if you're into horseback riding and things of that sort, it very much is a part of the culture, which fits in with the whole ranching idea. Mm-hmm. Restaurants go, like I mentioned earlier, if you want a burger, there's a lot of great hamburger places. There's a place here in Brownwood called Underwoods, which is known for their chicken. They've been around since, I don't know when, since, Texas was founded, I think they would try to claim anyway. Outside of town, in the middle of nowhere, there's a place called Cook's Fish Barn, they're only open Friday and Saturday, and they have all-you-can-eat catfish and chicken and things of that sort for like $12. It's the only place I know of you can get all-you-can-eat ribeye steak for $25. And so that's certainly a neat place to go to. There again, it's the type of place when I lived up north, the health department would never allow it to be open, but down here things are a little bit different, and so I mean it has wood floors and it's a little bit rustic, but it's just kind of a fun place to go. Like I say, here in town there's several tap houses opening up, and there's a winery outside of town. There's going to be a wine tasting place opening up. There's a place here in Brownwood that has won an award in Texas for the best gelato. And so we have the top gelato in Texas here in Brownwood. And for those that don't know, it's kind of like an ice cream. We've got several museums. We have 2 museums that are kind of based on the railroad, because the railroad, and we still have the railroad comes through. So you've got 2 museums. One is an old renovated depot, and the other is a museum that highlights, the railroad industry through the years here. They actually have a little train that you can ride with kids on a little track, there on the property, and that's all right downtown. Like I say, the downtown area, they're really trying to bring back and renovate and make it back into kind of a destination for people.
That's really good. I want to make sure that I give you the opportunity to highlight anything that you'd like to our listeners. Your church's website, places to follow you online. Where would you like to send our listeners today?
Well, we have a website, glcbrownwood.com. And we're also on Facebook, and it's capital GLC Brownwood on Facebook. We're a traditional congregation. We're small. We probably lean a little bit to the more aged side of things. I think you see in Brownwood even that's kind of true. You've got kind of the elderly community, and then you've got the younger. They're trying to attract, I think, the kind of middle-aged group back with some of these things that they're bringing in and some of the culture they're trying to create. It, like I say, it's a great place with traditional values, and it's a wonderful place to live. It's certainly, compared to many spots in the country, it's certainly more reasonable of a place to live cost-wise. I mean, our cost of living is very, very affordable, and there is employment available here. I mean, there's jobs.
That's always a good thing. Thank you so much for your time today. What are your parting thoughts for our listeners?
A blessed Lenten season, what is left of it, and look forward to the joyous hope of the resurrection and the empty tomb and all the hopes and promises that contains for us.
Absolutely. Thanks again. God's peace.
God's peace to you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more about the things that we talked about today, check out the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/66. I encourage you to check out that Audible trial offer. That's at lutherancartographer.com/audible. Get that free audiobook that you get to keep for trying out their service. Until next time, I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.